So this is the review for the Chapter 6 quiz. All right, it focuses in on the first couple sections of Chapter 6. In this first one, ooh, that didn't center very well. All right, in this first one, what we want to do is we want to graph the solution to the system, or determine the solution to the system by graphing. All right, so you're going to graph one line, you're going to graph the other line, and see where they cross. All right, so what I want you to do is identify your slope, identify your y-intercept, graph the line. Identify your slope, identify your y-intercept, and graph the line. Where the two lines cross is your solution. Now remember, when you write your solution, you have parentheses and a comma in the middle. Remember that points are always written x comma y. Your x value is how many you go over, and your y value is how many you go up or down. Remember, when you go to graph your line, if you are having a hard time graphing your line, you could always type it into the y equals on your calculator and then hit second and table to see the actual points that you need to graph. You could also just hit the graph button, typing in both equations and seeing where they cross. Go ahead and try this question, please. I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds or so. Again, remember, if you don't know how to graph the lines, type them into your calculator and then hit second and table so that you can see your points and then connect those points to form your line. So a reminder that the general form of the equation of a line is y equals mx plus b. Remember that the number in front of your x is your slope, and that is always written as a fraction. The top number in your slope is how many you go up or down. Up if it's positive, down if it's negative. And then the bottom number is how many you go over to the right. Your plus b is your y-intercept. All right, that's your y-intercept. Y-intercepts are always written 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So when we take a look at this first equation, we have y equals 2x minus 4. 2 is your slope. Now, I'm going to write that as a fraction. So I have 2 over 1. Anytime you just have an integer all by itself, it's really over 1. So this really means that you're going up 2 over 1. Your y-intercept is 0, comma, whatever your plus or minus is. So it's a minus 4, so this is going to be a negative 4. So remember, you have to start at the y-intercept. That's the first point that you graph. 0, comma 4 is where you start, negative 4 is where you start at. So we're starting right there. And now we want to follow the direction of our slope. So we're starting here and we're going up 2 over 1 to the right, up 2 over 1 to the right, up 2 over 1 to the right, and we could keep on going. Connect your dots to form your line. You should also, when you do graph these by hand, you should also label your line so you know which line is which. Now, on that one, if I chose instead to type it into the calculator, which you can do, the equation of that is 2x minus 4. So I'll go to y equals, type in 2x minus 4, and if I hit my graph, notice that I have that same exact picture that I have here. I know it's a little bit covered up. I'll go back to it in a second. Or to find your points, you hit second and table. So 0 was -4. You can still see on my graph, I have 0, -4. I have 1, -2, over to 1, down to -2. My next point is 2, 0, over to 2, up to 0. My next point is over to 3, up to 2, which is exactly what we have, 3, 2. Our next point is 4, 4. Notice that I go over to 4, up to 4. So you can use that calculator to help you graph those lines. For my second equation, in my second equation, I have 1/3 x plus 1. 1/3 is the number in front of your x, so that is your slope. That is where you are going up 1 over 3. Our y-intercept is 0, 1. So we're going to start at 0, 1. We're going to start right here. And now we're going to follow the slope from there. We're going up 1 over 3. So starting here, up 1 over 3, put a dot, up 1 over 3, put a dot. Connect your dots to form your line, and you should always label your line. So now I want to see where those two lines cross. Remember that if you had a hard time graphing that one, we could go back to our calculator. Remember that you can type in two lines at the same time. 1/3 would be 1 divided by 3, or you could do alpha y equals for the 1/3. And then we have our x plus 1. Notice that when I graph it, it looks like that. Remember, your picture of your graph should always match. If we take a look at our original one there that we did by hand, those two graphs match. All right. Remember that to get your points, you could do second and table. Now, notice I'm going to give you a little hack here, a little cheater thing. Notice that these twos are the same. So that is the same point for both equations. So our x value is 3, our y value is 2. Well, if we go back to our graph, where those two lines cross is that point that they have in common. They have the point 3, 2 in common because they have this point right here in common, which is 3, 2. Notice how that showed up on the calculator. It showed up as 2 and 2. They're the same. All right. So that's a little hack that you could use to help you get your solution answer. Take a look. You're going to have 2 of these on your quiz. The second one, you need to rearrange them for y equals first. So remember, we want our equation in that y equals mx plus b form. So we want to try and get this y all by itself and get this y all by itself. What I want you to do first is don't graph it yet. Just rearrange both equations for y equals. Because if you have the wrong equation, there's no sense in graphing it. So go through right now and just rearrange those two equations for y equals. I'll give you about 30 seconds just to rearrange those two equations. So looking at the first one, we want to try and get this y all by itself. So to get this y all by itself, we need to get rid of the negative 2x. We get rid of the negative 2x by doing plus 2x and plus 2x. Whatever you do to one side of the equal sign, you have to do to the other. So these cancel out on that left-hand side. All we're left with is our y equals. But now we want to put it in this form where our x comes first and our plus or minus whatever comes last. So we're not going to write down -5 plus 2x. We're going to take and switch around the order so that the x comes first. And we have 2x minus 5. That's our equation. That's then what we need to find the slope and the y-intercept from. For the second one, right, when we go to rearrange this other one, I'm just going to draw a line down here in the middle to separate those. We have 4x minus 2y. We want to try and get that -2y all by itself. So the first thing that I want to do is minus 4x and minus 4x. Those cancel out. So I have -2y equals, and again, I want to switch around the order because I want it to look like this, mx plus b. So I'm just going to take those terms and switch around the order. It's really a plus 10 because that's a positive 10. Now I have -2 times y. The opposite of times is divide. Remember that when you divide, you have to divide each and every term by that number. So divide by 2, divide by 2, divide by 2. Those cancel out. So now we have what we wanted. We have that y equals all by itself. Be careful right here. -4 divided by -2 is a positive 2. And then 10 divided by -2 is a -5 or -5. So now that we rearrange them for y equals, I want you to find the slope, find the y-intercepts, graph your two lines, and see where they cross. Go ahead and finish up number 2, please. Hopefully you noticed that our rearranged equations were both the same exact equation. So really you're only doing half the work here. So we have 2 over 1 as our slope. Remember, we want to write it as a fraction. That's really up 2 over 1. Our y-intercept is 0, -5. So starting at 0, -5 down here. We're following the slope. We're going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, so that we get this line. So that was -2x plus y equals -5. Really, technically, you should label it with your original one. The second line is the same exact thing. We have 2 over 1, and we have 0, -5. So that still means up 2 over 1. We're starting here. Every point on this blue equation is the same as every point on the red equation. Since every point is the same, they are the same exact identical line, your answer is infinite solutions. Every point on the one line is the same as every point on the other line. Now, the other answer that you might get on some is no solution. All right. An answer is no solution when you have parallel lines. So you have 2 lines that don't cross, like 2 lines that look like that run, come on board. 2 lines that run parallel that do not cross. All right, they're sort of like right next to each other, going in the same exact direction, and they are not crossing. They don't have to go up; they could go down as well. But that's when it's no solution. If you want to do this one on the calculator, let me show you what it would look like. Going back to our y equals. So we have 2x minus 5, and we have 2x minus 5. When we go to hit table, notice that every point on the one is the exact same thing as every point on the other. If we went to go and hit graph, notice that the one line is exactly on top of the other line. So that's what you're going to have. So you're going to have two questions like that on your quiz tomorrow. One will be already set equal to y equals. The other one you have to rearrange and then graph. Just again, be aware of no solution, an infinite solution, or if they graph at a point, it's at one particular point. So when we take a look at the next question, now we're going to solve them algebraically. When you go to solve a system like this algebraically, notice that you have your y equals and your y equals. Since you have them as y equals and y equals, all right, you want to set them equal to each other. So you're going to set, the first step in this is to set them equal to each other. 2x plus 6 equals 10x plus 30. Go ahead and solve the rest of this, please. Find both x and y. Find both x and y. So you have letters on both sides of the equal sign. We want to try and get all of our variables or all of our letters onto one side. You have your choice on how you want to solve this equation. You could either add 2x to both sides or subtract 10x from both sides. I like working with the negatives. To get rid of that negative, I'm going to do plus 2x and plus 2x. That's easier for me. So then I have 6 equals, sorry, not 6x. 6 equals 12x plus 30. Now I just have a two-step equation. Minus 30 minus 30. 6 minus 30 is negative 24 equals 12x. Divide by 12, divide by 12. That's just a one-step equation. Top divided by bottom. So I get negative 2 equals x. That's half of my answer. Now the other half of my answer, I need to take my x equals negative 2 and either sub it into here or here for x. You could type it into, you could go into either one of the equations. You'll get the same answer in the end. I like to look for what I think is the easier equation. I try and stay away from negatives. So I'm actually going to sub it into, well, because we have a negative 2, I'm actually going to sub it into the top one. I know normally I don't sub it into the negatives, but I know that a negative times a negative is a positive. So I'm going to sub it into that one. So I'm going to take my negative 2 and stick it in for x right there in my equation. So I'm going to have y equals negative 2 times negative 2 plus 6. Negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. So I have 4 plus 6. So I get y equals 10. Remember that many times on the Regents exam, they will have you write this as a coordinate, as a point. Remember, points are always written x comma y. So you just take your x answer, inside parentheses, your x answer comes first, then a comma, then your y answer, and close your parentheses. Now remember, on your quiz, you could always check these answers. You don't have to check them, but you could. You could check your answers by taking your answer and subbing it in and see if you end up with the same thing on both sides of the equal sign. So looking at this first equation, instead of y equals, I would have 10 equals. Instead of negative 2 times x, I'd have negative 2 times negative 2 plus 6. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4. 4 plus 6 is 10. So 10 equals 10. It checks. In the second equation, I would have, instead of y equals, I would have 10 equals. Instead of 10 times x, I would have 10 times negative 2 plus 30. Well, 10 times negative 2 is negative 20, plus 30 is positive 10, so 10 equals 10, it checks. If your point checks in both things, meaning that you get the same number on both sides, you know for sure that your answer is correct. Again, it's up to you whether you want to do the check or not. But again, in a question like this, where you have the y equals and y equals at the beginning, you want to set them equal to each other. The one equation equals the other one. Take a look at this next one. In question number 4, what I would do in this one, notice that you have one of your equations set equal to y already. What you need to do first is rearrange that second equation to be a y equals equation. Go ahead and do number 4. Find both x and y. Again, the first thing that you want to do is take that second equation and rearrange for y equals. You will have some decimals when you rearrange it. That's fine. When you solve it, you won't have any decimals on this particular question. So the first thing that you want to do is rearrange that second equation for y equals. So to get this negative 5y all by itself, I would want to do minus 6x and minus 6x first. So now I have negative 5y equals, I'm going to switch things around just to keep it consistent. You didn't have to there though. And then we have negative 5 times y. The opposite of times by negative 5 is to divide by negative 5. So now I have my y equals all by itself. Now, negative 6 divided by negative 5. Normally, when you're graphing, you would leave it as a fraction so that you could graph the slope easier. But because we're doing this algebraically, I'm actually going to take and do negative 6 divided by negative 5. And I'm going to get my positive 1.2x. Remember, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Negative 3 divided by negative 5 is going to be a plus 0.6. So now I have my two equations set equal to y equals. So now that I have them set equal to y equals, I'm going to take and set them equal to each other. So 4x minus 5 equals 1.2x plus 0.6. Solving this equation, I would work with the smaller of the two letters first. So minus 1.2x minus 1.2x. 4 minus 1.2x is a 2.8x. Minus 5 equals 0.6. I'm going to add 5 and add 5, solving my two-step equation. So I get 2.8x equals, this is going to be a 5.6. Divide by 2.8, divide by 2.8, and you get x equals 2. That's one of my two answers. Now that I have one of my two answers, I need to take this and either sub it into here for x or here for x. I personally like the top one better. So I'm going to sub it into the top equation. So I'm going to sub it into y equals 4x minus 5. I'm going to take my 2 and sub it in. So instead of 4 times x, I have 4 times 2 minus 5. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 minus 5 is 3. So my two answers are x equals 2 and y equals 3. Take a look at question number 5. Now, this one, when you take a look at it, you have opposites with our y's. When you have opposites like that, you want to use the elimination method. The elimination method says the first thing that you want to do is add those two equations going down. Because when you add going down, these y's will cancel out. Go ahead and find both x and y, please. So when we add going down, these y's cancel out. 2x plus 4x is 6x. Bring down my equal sign. 24 plus negative 6 is 18. All that you're left with here is a one-step equation. Divide by 6, divide by 6. You get one of your two answers right away, x equals 3. You now have your choice. You can take this 3 as our x and either sub it into here or here. Doesn't matter which one. All right. Which one do I want to sub it into? I'll take and sub it into the second one. All right. So I'm going to sub it into 4x plus 3y equals negative 6. So I'm going to take my 3 and sub it in for x. So I'm going to have 4 times 3 plus 3y equals negative 6. So 12 plus 3y equals negative 6. Minus 12 minus 12. So 3y equals negative 18. Divide by 3's. You get y equals negative 6. So I got x equals 3 and y equals negative 6. Again, many times on the Regents exam, they'll have you write your answer as a point. The point would be 3 comma negative 6. Same thing on the last one. I should have done it on the last one too. You have 2, 3. So you would write your point as 2 comma 3. Remember, your x value goes first, your y value goes second. So now we get to the stuff from yesterday. Notice that in this one, you don't have opposites there. You don't have a y equals all by itself. So what we want to do is, just like in the last one where we had opposites there already with the y's, this time you want to make your own opposites. You're going to make your own opposites by multiplying. Well, you have your choice on whether you want to do the x's or whether you want to do the y's. However, I think in this one, the x's are easier. How do I know that the x's are easier? Is because 5 goes into 10 evenly. 2 does not go into 3 evenly. You could use the y's, and we'll get to that in a second, but I would use the x's. So to make an opposite of your larger number, the number that's farther away from 0 on the number line. So I want to make an opposite with my 10. The opposite of 10 is negative 10. To get a negative 10 down here, I would want to multiply this negative 5 by 2, because 2 times negative 5x would give me negative 10x, which is the opposite of there. Then it'll be just like the previous problem. Please remember, the biggest mistake that people make is to not distribute all 3 times. So 2 times negative 5, 2 times negative 3, 2 times 19. Go ahead and do question number 6, please.
Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Will we take, if we don't get back to school, will we take the Regents virtually?
That is a question that we do not know the answer to yet. My guess is they canceled the January Regents exam. And as long as you were passing the class, you got your Regents credit for it. Do I think that they will do that for June? I think they probably will, but they probably won't announce that till like March or April. So honestly, we have no idea yet. So I just recopied that top equation. All right, we're not touching that one. All we're doing on this one is distributing across the bottom. 2 times negative 5x is negative 10x. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6y. 2 times 19 is 38. Now we have our opposites. Notice that now we have our 10x and our negative 10x. So now what we can do is we can add going down just like the previous problem, because now these x's will cancel out. 2y plus negative 6y is negative 4y. Negative 6 plus 38 is positive 32. Divide by negative 4, divide by negative 4, and we get y equals negative 8. Now that you have y equals negative 8, now you have your choice. You can take this negative 8 and you can stick it into here or here for y. I think that top equation is easier because it only has one negative as opposed to the 2 negative signs / minus signs. So I'm going to take and sub it into my top equation. This is always like a dead spot on the board. So I'm going to sub it into that top equation. So I'm going to have 10x plus 2 times negative 8 equals negative 6. So 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. I'm going to write minus 16. Two-step equation, plus 16 plus 16. So 10x equals 10. Divide by 10, divide by 10, and you should have gotten x equals 1. Remember, if they had you write it as a coordinate, this would be 1 comma negative 8. Now, like I said, you did have your choice at the beginning of the problem. We could have solved this one completely differently, as this first step, we might not have made opposites with our x's. If we wanted to, we could have made opposites with our y's. Now, 2 does not go into 3 evenly. So what you would have to do is multiply those two numbers together. 2 times 3 is 6. So we want to create a positive 6 and a negative 6. To make a positive 6 up here, we would have to multiply by 3. So we would have to take and do this top equation times 3 times 3 and times 3. That way we're going to get a positive 6y in the middle. We would have to get a negative 6y here. To get a negative 6y, we'd have to multiply this bottom one by 2. Distribute, distribute, distribute. So now I would end up with a positive 6y and a negative 6y. Then I could add going down. But again, make sure that you distribute to all 3 terms. So that is what your quiz is going to look like. You have your